Hello, everybody.
Hey,
We
hey,
we are
Hey,
here again. Alive again.
alive
Um,
barely.
yeah, we're trying to stay that way, and
yes.
I look a little different this week
You
because I
look
don't
great.
have my light, so I didn't go get a tan or anything.
Hey
But
guys,
maybe,
if you think he looks wonderful, post it and let us know.
yeah, that's
You were
nice.
just laying on the beach, huh?
No, I hate the beach. But anyway,
Really?
yeah, I do. I just
Oh,
it's too
I
sandy. I
love
do like to
the
make
ocean.
sandcastles though.
Oh, I'll
I
show
really
you,
do.
Mike. Just real quick. Look, I did the wall. What does that say?
Oh, you got to relax. Oh, beach? Come on.
Yes.
Uh, man, in Utah,
I know.
there
What can
used
you
to be
say?
a
No
lake,
wonder
so.
if the sand thing's going. Yeah.
Okay. We are excited to be here, everybody. And as you can see, we have Sherry Cardinal back again. And
Hi,
we are
Sherry.
excited. And Ronelle, this is her first, oh, that this way. This is her first time meeting Sherry. So we are just excited. And
Yep.
so Sherry had a few things she wanted to talk about. And I think I think it's going to be well worth our time. So
Well, I'm excited.
Sherry will introduce herself and give a little kind of her
Tip
credentials,
off.
what's
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
on. Yep.
hmm
And
Yeah.
everyone, I didn't introduce and say welcome back, Ronell. I guess you were there last week, but I'm
Yes.
glad you're here. So, okay, Sherry, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure, my honor,
What a
uh,
joy.
and nice to meet you finally, Renell. I've heard a lot about you
Yeah, I'm
through my
excited.
yeah. So, just by way of introduction, I'm Sherry Cardinal. Um, I'm the chief grandmother or Geechee Nokomis of the Red Bear Pembina Chippewa Indians.
Oh,
Um,
wonderful.
my chief, as many of you know, is Mitiga David Taylor. Um, but I'm here more as my professional self today. I am a licensed clinical social worker, been a psychotherapist in private practice for over 40 years.
Wow.
I have credentials as a diplomat in the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress for my contributions to the field.
Wow.
Some of my better known incidents that I've been involved in with my company, which is called CISM International, Critical Incident Stress Management International.
We'll also leave that in the below for everyone to be able to read everything about her.
I'll write that down. We'll put it in there again. I like it.
Yeah. Uh, One of the biggest events that I oversaw was the Deepwater Horizon incident, otherwise known as the Gulf oil spill. Uh,
Oh,
my
that's how
job
I.
was with Transocean to counsel the survivors and provide grief services to the families of those that
Wow.
were deceased. It went on for 3 months
Wow.
because the well wasn't shut down for 3 months.
I remember that. It was
I
just
Yeah.
remember
kept
that.
And
pouring
so
and
it
pouring.
also encompassed taking in the management of Transocean because whether anyone wants to believe it or not, they were devastated, heartbroken. No one
Wow.
intended that, to happen.
It looked like it was unintentional.
Of course, any blowout is.
Yeah,
That's
well,
the
you
name.
never know.
That's the gamble in offshore drilling, right? You don't know everything all the time.
unless you're
It's
in
like
the
in life.
unless you're in the Ukraine or Syria.
Well,
I'm just
That's
kidding.
also
another one.
involved in the Fort Hood shooting uh,
Really?
with the one of the survivors of that shooting.
Hmm.
Uh, we've
Wow.
I've been involved with the high school shooting, Santa Fe High School in Santa Fe, Texas.
Yes.
Um, there's many of them, some local, some not, but just say hundreds over the years.
Yeah.
And so they
Wow.
allowed me to be a diplomat. Needless to say, I specialize in trauma, and my main clients are indigenous and first responders,
Wow.
okay, and military.
And I love those first responders.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So today I want to talk a little bit about how in my practice I take my spirituality, which is Medewiwin, mixed with my Christian upbringing and the psychology and psychoneuroimmunology that I've studied over the years. Psychoneuroimmunology is a fancy name for the mind-body connections and how our mind and body communicate with each other. So the first thing I want to say about trauma is that it's not just in your mind. Trauma affects every part of your brain, therefore it impacts every part of your body, most notably your nervous system.
Both Renelle and I can speak to that personally.
Yes, yes. And we're all familiar, and that's an important thing to remember, because we tend to, sometimes we get a little overzealous calling things that aren't trauma.
Sometimes.
And dismissing some of the importance of real trauma. But trauma's on a continuum. There's the heavy duty trauma that we all know, and Renelle that you've lived through, and Mike that you've lived through.
Many times.
And wars and violence and all those things. But there's, on the other side of the spectrum, there's still trauma, but we don't think about it much. We're not aware of it so much.
That's
we
true.
consider it almost normal, but it's
Isn't
not.
that sad?
Built into our growth, kind of, is how we see it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I
It's
have
part of
never
our-
heard so much talk about anxiety and anxiety attacks amongst people.
Well,
Growing
yeah.
up, you just didn't hear that.
Well, I kind of, I have my opinions about that, and I see it in my work, is that we have too much media,
Yep.
and we got our ears to trauma all day, every day. Plus, we have our ears to being gaslighted, lied to, manipulated through the media, through the government.
the algorithms.
Oh boy, yeah.
And so everybody's on a high anxious scale because you don't know what to believe or who to believe.
Right.
Okay. And that's traumatic, believe it or not. And you see it in the use of anxiolytics and antidepressants and heavy duty psychoactive medications. That's not how we were created. We were created to live in the Garden of Eden. Of course, that's another whole story. But basically, what trauma does to us psychologically is it injures our core sense of self, our self-efficacy, our self-agency, our ability to act on our own behalfs, a feeling of being sort of cut off at the knees. And it does that through the nervous system. Okay.
Wow.
I'm not going to get into the parts of the brain except to say that two parts to keep in mind in this is the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking brain, where executive functioning takes place, and the limbic system in our brain, which is the amygdala, where it's the seat of our emotions. Okay.
Some say it's the seat of the soul. Is that correct or no?
No, I see that as different. I see that as different.
That'll be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I think we do a real poor job in Western civilization of understanding the human condition,
Mm.
understanding
Yes.
humanity. Where do we teach it?
We don't teach
For
it
the
in
first
school,
5 years, maybe at home, but after that,
Well, that's assuming the parents know it.
yeah, yeah,
right?
very good point.
Unfortunately, in childhood trauma, that's not the
No,
case.
it is not.
And there's things that we wouldn't even think are traumatic that are, or that have leave a lasting
Mm,
impression, which
mm.
um, interferes with child development, that sense of core self. I'm not going to get into the stages of child development. Just take these things. You can
These
go
are all things
research.
that I would be fascinated to talk about too. We just,
Yeah,
we, yeah, just so everyone,
we
we're
can
not
do a
trying to breeze over
podcast on
stuff.
each one.
We could, and I think it would probably be very well time. I mean, be worth it.
Mhm.
But
So, what I want to focus on today mostly is the subtleties of trauma and what they look like and how they impact and how I use spiritual healing as part of the psychological process.
Mm.
Okay. So, a bit of a case study, just a little scenario to work with. Okay. I'm going to talk about a person by the name of Anne
Okay.
who came into therapy at 42 years old.
Mm.
Okay. The backstory of this person is that um, she came from a family that adopted her. She did not know her biological parents.
Yeah.
Back in the day, they didn't do open adoptions.
mm,
Adoption records were closed, sealed. Okay.
yeah, my wife's was too.
Yeah. And that was very common, but very stupid. Okay. Because right then and there, you have a disconnect for that child
Interesting.
between who they're told they are and who they actually are.
Boy.
And as they grow and develop, okay, that has an impact
Wow.
because in the Medewi Win spirituality, we believe that everybody is Ogi Chagwan, which is a spirit lowered into a
Wow.
body. Okay. So even though from the world's point of view, they tell you certain things about yourself, you have an inner self, an inner spirit that ends up in conflict lots of times.
Yeah.
And I see this in
Wow.
children that come in to therapy for ADHD, okay, acting out all the time. So Anne's story was that she kind of went along with life until she was 6 or 7 years old. And she remembers very, very vividly that they were on their way to a family reunion and they were driving in the car
Mm-hmm.
with her mother. And her mother said, I have something important to tell you. Anne's like, typical 6 or 7 year old. Yeah, okay. Uh, you are adopted.
Mm.
What does that mean?
Wow.
Well, your natural parents couldn't take care of you, so they gave you to us to raise as if you are our own, and we love you like you are our own.
Wow.
Well, to a child that age, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. All of a sudden, what they believed about their life was not true.
Mm.
They believed, she believed, and she tells us very vividly, she believed that those were her mom and dad.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, they're not.
Wow. Yeah.
And at that point in her development, she suffered what's called an attachment trauma.
Mm.
She remembers it very vividly, feeling like all of a sudden, well, where do I belong? How do I fit in? Why did you tell me now? Well, we're going to a family reunion. They were afraid somebody might.
Oh boy.
So you had to go and put on a face when you were just like,
This person did, yes.
The
yeah, this
person did
person.
know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Anne.
And so that attachment trauma, if you read up on that, it's pretty severe. It affects people
Wow.
and their relationships throughout their whole entire life.
Wow.
Okay. So that was a major trauma for Anne. Okay.
Mm.
Then when she got a little older, she tried to ask her parents, her adoptive parents, more questions about where she came from.
Makes sense.
And her mother was very upset with her. It's like
Wow.
she remembers her mother telling her, why are you so ungrateful? We've loved you like you were
Oh no.
our own.
Oh
Um,
no.
there's no need for you to know any of that. And so she took the blame and the
Oh.
shame
Hmm.
upon herself.
Oh
Major trauma
no.
number 2.
And I mean, Anne's mom is like, she just didn't
Didn't know any.
understand.
I mean,
Yeah.
well-meaning, but just uninformed.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, this was in the 50s. Okay.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So none of this was ever discussed in the family. It was a closed topic. The other trauma that Anne had was her adoptive dad was, to put it bluntly, a child predator.
Oh no. Oh.
Okay. Not in the sense of the sexual abuse that we think about, but it was much more subtle. Again, the subtleties.
Passive aggressive.
It was, the behavior was fondling, hugging too long, too close, touching,
Okay.
a lot of touching on the body, a lot
Oh.
of what she describes as wet, sloppy kisses.
Oh.
Okay. And we call that sexualizing the child.
Yeah. Grooming.
And Anne didn't remember any active sex, but she can remember being creeped out. And
Oh yeah.
describes that when her dad would come into her room at night, she would pretend she was asleep so that he wouldn't linger.
Oh.
And so she was fighting all these things.
Wow.
So as a teenager, guess what Anne did? She acted out. Okay. Why would you not expect that? Okay. And so she acted out sexually, like a lot of girls do.
Of course.
Mixing
Because
love and sexuality, not knowing who or what she was. She even describes a time when she was about 14 where she wasn't even sure that she wanted to be female.
what? Oh my
This is
word.
important because of what's happening with the transgenders today.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of it, and people are going to excoriate me for this, a lot of it is based in trauma.
Mm.
Okay. Unresolved trauma. But changing your appearance does not change your gender. And
Yeah.
people will argue that, but she would dress like a boy. She cut her hair. She hung out with boys. People called her sir
Wow.
because she hid everything female about her. That went on for a couple of years.
Wow.
And as it would happen, of course, as a teenager, as 18 years old, through the acting out, she became pregnant out of wedlock.
Oh no.
Okay.
That's hard.
Now, she had an option here. What am I going to do? Am I going to carry this baby or am I going to abort?
Mm.
Okay. So, again, another trauma.
Yeah.
You can see it piling up. Okay. So she and the father of the child ended up getting married. They kept the child. Okay. But
Mhm.
as these kinds of things often do, it it failed within a few years, that marriage. Okay. So divorce. More trauma from the developmental side, right? The attachment trauma. You can't
Like
trust
right on top
any
of
man.
it.
Yep.
Yeah. So it just becomes an amalgamation.
Yes. That's the whole point. It's layer upon layer upon layer. We like to talk about it therapeutically like an onion. And so when you do
Like
therapy,
Shrek.
you have to peel back each layer of the onion
Yeah.
until you get to the pearl. And the pearl is always the damage to the core sense of self.
Like the earliest point
wow.
or the main idea. Like,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of your question.
oh, sorry, I said like the earliest point or of time.
Yeah, well, yeah, it can the development, the arrested development can happen anywhere along those lines.
Okay.
Again, the theories of development, child development, but it depends. It's highly individual. You can't say that it happens here or happens there. But when you see it piling on like this, okay. So after the divorce, she did go into therapy, okay, and was able to learn how to cope. Carried on. She was a horse trainer.
Oh, wow.
I figured that out, so I'm gonna put this you on the screen.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah. She was a horse trainer and she was very good at it, and had some thoroughbreds on the track, and also some riding horses, some barrel racing, road rodeo. That's how she kind of used up her energy and kept herself sane. Horses are very therapeutic. And to be with a horse, you have to be in the moment. You can't be drifting off into your past or your future, because the horse lives in the moment. So you better be right there with it. And so that was a form of therapy for her. And Anne gets to age 36. And to add on to everything that's happened to her up to this point, she was carjacked at gunpoint.
What?
She was dragged from her vehicle, pistol whipped out the head and face, and left bleeding in the middle of the street. Okay.
Oh, my.
So that's when Anne came back to therapy. Now I'm going to ask, and even people that are listening, what do you suppose happened to this person?
Well, I think she healed and is now blessing the lives of other people.
Well, for me, I mean, what I would think is complete disarray and ultimately turning to self-medication and overdose or suicide. That's basically the odds would say that. I would, I mean, if I was thinking about that, sad to say.
Yeah. All those things she reports thinking about.
Wow.
Okay. But didn't become an addict. Okay. Tends to drink a little too much wine on occasion. Okay. Still has her horses.
Oh, wonderful.
And the reason I know this is that person is me.
Kind of figured that out.
Okay. The reason I know that, because it's me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tremendous.
So how does one live through that? Well, she started out at a point going back to school after the divorce, getting a degree in sociology, social psychology. She went in Divinity College, the Baptist University, McMaster.
Wow.
Okay. And I really thought at that point, I was involved in the youth ministry at the United Church of Canada, where I went to church. And I really thought I was going to enter the ministry. Did I mention that my adoptive father was a lay preacher?
Wow. No.
Yeah. So I had a hard time discerning, and I had to learn discernment between what is of God and what isn't.
Well, of course, because
Yeah.
every area of your life, trust was broken.
Yep. Yep.
Even
Okay.
the understanding of love. I mean,
Yep.
that's the core. And when it's your parents, it really messes with you
But
because
there was one
children look up to their
underlying thing.
parents.
There's one underlying thing that's very important here.
Okay.
And I really can't even tell you where it came from, other than the only thing that does it for me in understanding is Ogi Chagwan. I'm a spirit lowered in a body.
Yeah.
Ogi Chagwan is the Ojibwe word for spirit lowered in a body. Okay.
A stranger, sort of like in this world.
Well,
Yeah. Well, it's more like,
I have a word for it. It's called spiritual hijacking.
well, not hijacking in the bad sense, but
Right.
hijacking in that it held up my core self.
Right.
Okay. I have cousins. My cousin Patricia will tell you this. She tells me this, that when my adoptive grandfather died, I was comforting the adults, and I was maybe 8 or 9 years old.
Oh, my goodness.
I was comforting the adults. So where did that come from?
Oh,
Yeah.
And when I was a teenager, we lived near the Tuscarora Reservation in Niagara Falls, New York.
Beautiful place.
And I was,
Beautiful place.
yes. Well, it was until the power project took half the reservation
oh, wow.
to make a reservoir for the power plants.
Mm.
And I was involved with that, with Chief Elton Green and a spiritual leader, medicine man called Wallace Mad Bear Anderson. Now, why was I drawn to the Indians, I wonder?
So that was before. It was before you knew who your adopted parent or who your birth parents were.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And through them is when I started sort of clamping on to the Indian spirituality through the powwows and things and the other things that I was allowed to observe. My father, being a lay preacher, often would be preaching at the Baptist church on the reservation when Chief Green, who was also a minister, couldn't be there because of his political wranglings with Washington trying to get the treaties and the land deals and all of that
I see.
settled. So I became very well aware of what was going on with the Indians, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart. I mean, I would literally cry, sobbing, as I found out things. And I had no idea where that came from. No idea.
Yeah, I was broken as I was reading all that, but I didn't have, I wasn't brought to a bawling or like a connection that way.
I was hoping my family would.
Yeah.
And they're not.
So continued working on the racetrack, by the way, and training horses.
That's neat.
But I felt the calling. I felt a strong pull to find out, A, who I was.
Yeah.
Okay. And B, what was I really here for? I mean, horses were wonderful and all that, but there was something missing. I had to go find myself to use the.
Yeah.
Did you suffer a great deal of detachment?
Constantly. Yeah. Always feel like an outsider, like I don't belong. I still have to fight that all day, every day.
Wow.
Okay.
Which is, I would assume that that the horses probably helped with that because brought you into the moment. Is what you were saying earlier.
Yes. And you could always, having a relationship with a horse or a dog, because I raised dogs or did, I could relate to them because I found that they communicated honestly. You could trust
Oh,
what they were
wow.
saying.
Yeah.
And you learn to read body language. Okay. Now,
Uh-huh.
while I was a teenager, because my father was a lay preacher and also a very good baritone soloist, by the way,
Mm.
I spent a lot of time in church.
Wow.
And one of the reasons when I was putting up an advertisement that this was going to happen tonight, my favorite hymn in church as a young girl was Be Thou My Vision. Okay.
That's a great song.
Wow.
And I used to sing it as a prayer
Wow.
constantly, still do. Okay.
Oh.
And I really look back at it now and see that my prayers were answered and I was led to certain people
Mm-hmm.
and led to certain situations and led to certain therapists that brought me to the point that I had a sense of who I was.
Wow.
Okay. How did this happen?
Yeah.
Well,
How did it?
Yeah.
I read a book many, many years ago by a man by the name of T.W. Hunt. It's called The Mind of Christ.
Hmm.
And this book, along with another book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, both these books had very profound impacts to me.
Okay.
One, because Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee really spoke to me, and I became even more curious about my background. Where did I come from? And then all the Irish and Scottish things, hymns, music that I was drawn to. I even have a picture of myself as maybe 10, 12 years old in a Scottish kilt or Irish kilt. They both wear kilts. Okay. But I was drawn to these things. I was drawn to these.
Wow.
That is fascinating to me.
Yeah. And that continued to happen
Mm-hmm.
for many years. Once my birth parents both passed, I then felt free to search in earnest.
So that was completely separate from anything you knew
Yes.
in your logical mind,
Right.
but somehow your spirit lowered. I didn't want to attempt to say the word.
Ogie Chagwan.
Ogi Chagwan, thank you.
Every child one.
Knew
Yeah.
that was the case.
That's the leading. Okay.
Wow.
And so I'm very careful to teach my clients about promptings or inklings or your likes and dislikes.
Yeah.
Disregard what's going on around you or what people are telling you. Look inside for those inklings and promptings because therein lies your truth. And that's where the book, The Mind of Christ, came in, because it was very how to think Christ-like instead of chaos and depression and suicide and anxiety and post-traumatic injury. I don't call it post-traumatic stress disorder because it's not a disorder. It's an actual injury. You don't say you have broken leg disorder.
It's a good point because it absolutely is an injury.
An injury that happens to you. Okay. So I decided to go back to college in my 20s, studied, as I said, social psychology, changed to divinity college because I felt the calling with the United Church of Canada because I was working with the youth there. But in divinity college, I really had to struggle with Hebrew. I don't know how to explain that, but I couldn't pass Hebrew. So I had to replace Hebrew with the course. So I looked over the courses and I decided on this one about social work because it sounded, working with people. I said, well, that's the same as ministry, right?
Oops, we
Or
lost
similar.
Linnell. We lost Renelle for a second.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry.
So
I know
then,
you're causing trauma. You're causing disassociation.
I, the computer. I don't think it was me.
I'm joking.
okay. I just lost my train of thought.
Oh,
Very sorry. That's on me. I should have just not said
Oh,
anything.
I took a social work course.
Okay.
Well, I was also doing research for my divinity degree. And so I chose to research how women were treated in the ministry in the United Church of Canada. Yeah, it was very interesting
that is
because
interesting.
it ended up being they were treated very horribly and
Yes,
not
they were.
given the full ministry. This
Wow.
one woman, I'll never forget it. She said she was standing there and somebody asked if there was a minister that could go and give communion to one of their family members. And she offered, and they said, "Well, you're not a real minister."
Oh,
So I said,
holy cow.
I'm not sure about this. I've lived through this before.
I do not want to
Wow.
be I will not be dismissed. That's the feeling that I get, right? Just thinking about
Yeah.
it.
So
Wow.
I went into social work and graduated with my social work degrees.
Now, how do you like the social work versus psychology?
Well, I majored in clinical social work, which is
Okay.
psychiatric social work is another name for it.
Okay.
Of course, you take courses in doing, grassroots social work. You have to do that. But then I specialized and became, you can be a licensed social worker or a licensed clinical social worker. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker because I took the clinical track and passed all the clinical exams. It's very much like the exams you have to pass, like for a law degree to become a lawyer, stuff like that. You still
Gotcha.
have those, yeah. So there's this procedure you have to follow, and so I did that. Okay. In the meantime, I'm still singing "Be Thou My Vision."
Wow.
Okay,
Wow.
and the the urge, it became an urge eventually to find my birth parents. I couldn't ignore it any longer. At first, it was an inkling. At first, it was these promptings. At first, it was these, I call them spiritual guidances that led me on these paths. Because in social work, my first job was with the Family Services of Hamilton Wentworth in Ontario, Canada.
Okay.
And my first out of office job was with the Oshwegan Six Nations Reserve.
Be thou my vision.
I still didn't know where I came from. Okay.
Man.
But I worked there and worked with, the indigenous population, and it just flowed. I don't know how to explain how I know what I know sometimes. I just don't know how to explain it other than its promptings. Sometimes I have to listen to what I'm saying because like, wow, I didn't know that.
Wow.
What? Whoa, I'm so insightful.
Well, you know what that's like, I'm sure.
I absolutely do. So
Yeah.
I will say this. It's like the first time that urge.
Yeah.
I've had that before, and one of the times was when I heard Mitiga speak. I didn't even know what he was saying at the time, but something about his voice said, "You need to talk to him," and I don't know why, but exactly. But I do know that it was important that I reach out to him, and so I listened to it. But I think I understand to at least a small degree what that feels like.
Wow.
Well,
I know what that feels like.
it's a deep subject. It really is, because the one thing about spirituality is it's not something you can just talk about,
Right.
or it's not something you can read about. You have to actually live it.
Yeah.
You live it. And because I had nothing else to rely on or nobody else to rely on, I felt that detached. I
Wow.
relied on my spiritual promptings. And most of my dreams, most of my visions, most of my steps on my pathway were done through these promptings.
Yeah, wow.
And so I've never
Wow.
lived inside the box, even as a social worker. You
Mm.
know, I did
Mhm.
what I had to do to get my
Get the
credentials.
letters.
Yeah. Uh, but then I went out on my own. I've done animal assisted therapy. I've done the critical incident stress management.
Wow.
I do the spirituality in dealing with PTSI clients. Um, the thing about the mind of Christ is this. If you read that book, and it has workbooks now and it has revised editions, it's come a long way. It teaches you how to think differently.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
this is critical because cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the main treatments for PTSI.
Which, by the way, is PTSD. Everybody, she's it shouldn't be called PTSD. Is that what we talked about earlier?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's a post traumatic stress
Stress
injury, or
injury.
yeah,
Yeah. And so when I was doing my degree, my master's degree, I was doing it at a Christian university. And they mixed theology and psychology because it was run by Jesuits in California.
yeah. They're usually pretty well
On
active.
the
I
edge.
can't think of the word, but
On the edge, you
yeah.
know. They're not as traditional as some. It's a teaching order, and they happen to be running this university. So we had Jesuit priests and psychiatrists and a whole mixture of different types of professors there. And so that's when I started to meld all this stuff together.
Oh,
And I
no.
looked, part of my job was I had to do a master's thesis. So I started looking for scripture and psychology that matched up.
Hmm.
And the one thing that I found, of course, was 1 Corinthians, where it talks about the mind of Christ.
Mm.
Well, I had read that book, and all of a sudden, here it was in the scriptures, right? Go figure that. Okay.
Wow.
It's like they talked about it.
Um, and the chapter that really, 1 Corinthians 2, 5 through wherever, goes on and on to talk about the mind of Christ. And what I found was that this matched up with the Ojibwe 7 grandfather teachings.
Hmm.
And with the Judaic 7 laws, and even in the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
Okay. All these things were matching up. So I said, okay, but what do I do with all this stuff? Okay. I then decided to go on a vision quest. How am I supposed to live my life? How do I combine the mind of Christ with cognitive behavioral therapy? And then there's, I think, one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, to which is good and acceptable to the Lord. It's Galatians, I believe. I'm not very good. That kind of stuff.
Sorry, Renelle dropped. I didn't want to say anything to get in the way. So
Okay.
hopefully she'll be back.
So I had to figure out how to put all these things together.
Yeah.
Okay. So I went up to the Rockies and the Rocky Mountains by myself for about a week, and prayed a lot, hiked a lot, went horseback riding through the Rockies a lot. And one night I was sleeping, and this voice woke me up, clear as I'm talking to you. One is the highest number. I said, what? Didn't repeat. One is the highest number. What in the
It's like not
world?
only were you hearing things, but one being the highest number. That's a little bit of a perspective change.
Huge.
Yeah.
You talk about all these things happening in one instant.
Yeah.
Okay? Like, in other words, there's no difference. We only think there's a difference. But in the spirit world, there's no difference
Between what?
between what God teaches us, what Creator teaches us,
Mm-hmm.
what Creator wants for us, what Creator does for us, how we're supposed to respond to Creator through the seven grandfather teachings and
Okay.
all of those things.
Okay, I'm with you. So
Okay?
across the board, all of us.
Across the board. Yeah. Doesn't matter. You could be Buddhist, whatever. Okay? The thing that separates us is the trauma because we don't get it. Trauma separates. Trauma interferes with our human and spiritual development.
My brother and I had a conversation today, and it was on somewhat of this subject that what happens and what happened with me is as traumatic things happened, we would have things that it almost broke a piece of us or created a disturbance or hole in us. And there are we talked about the darkness that exists. That's real.
Yes.
But because of the hole and the defenses being down, despite it wasn't our fault, we didn't do anything.
No.
Yet that hole was still there,
Yep.
and it was filled with not straight darkness and evil, but it was very disruptive.
Well,
If
the
nothing else.
subtlety of shaming and blaming people.
Yes. Oh, I felt that very thoroughly through my
Yeah, and
teens.
again, it's the subtlety. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be in your face at all. You know, it
And you're
was like
thinking
when
it
I was.
yourself, so it's like this is me.
Yeah,
I'm like this.
it injures your core self.
Yeah.
Like as a little girl, once it got out into the neighborhood, you know how mean girls can be, young
Oh
girls.
goodness. I got a 13-year-old.
I used to get called Little Orphan Annie.
Oh wow.
Okay. And that stuck with me to the point that I can totally change my name when I was able to. I divorced myself from Anne. It's not my legal name anymore. So
So
that's
you actually your name was Anne?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
My name as an adoptee was Sharon Ann.
Okay.
Yeah. And I went to Sherry. That's a whole nother story because Sharon was spelled wrong. And so it was spelled with 2 R's on my birth certificate. It was only supposed to be one. So it was actually Sharon. And I hated that. So I changed it to Sherry.
You're taking control. You're like, you know
You
what?
have to. That's the
Yeah.
thing because the trauma that gets to your core self, you have the choice of becoming a victim or a victor.
And I have felt both, I'll be honest.
Of course. So did I. That's why I
Yeah.
was acting out. Okay.
Yeah.
And why stupid stuff kept happening to me. I forgot to mention that I was date raped at 16. But so you
Like-
become a trauma magnet, you know? And
Because
so
you start to think I deserve this is who
Yes.
I am.
yeah,
And it's not it really isn't our fault and not your
That's the
fault in this
shame core.
situation. Exactly. And that pulls in light attracts lights, but darkness attracts darkness. Now, it wasn't us that put the darkness there to begin with.
Nope.
Completely. No, I don't believe that. But it got there, and so it would attract if
Yeah.
if I'm correct. And
yeah. Well, what do you have to measure it against?
yeah, that's true. The only
Because we
thing,
don't teach it anywhere, do we?
yeah, and even if we did, it's hard to put into our English words how to express these things.
Because it's a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it's the thing that worked for me, and it was unintentional. Well, the thing that I can't say worked for me, that's the wrong vernacular. The thing that was the most healing
Okay.
in a very tangible way, because all these traumas were piling up on me, was, again, one is the highest number. So I was left with that to figure out, how am I going to work this into my life? You got to understand, I was camping up in the Rockies. I came down from my campsite to go home, and I dropped into the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. I loved their chapel. I'd been there before. Their chapel is built like this, so that the glass in it takes your eyes up skyward into the wild blue yonder.
Oh, that's...
It is incredibly, to me, I get goosebumps just thinking about it.
That sounds beautiful.
Inspirational. So I went in there, and they were having a church service. It was a kind of a musical one of the more modern, upbeat ones with, guitars and drums. And I'm like, cool, this is like cup of tea.
I'm rocking.
And during the service, pastor said, does anybody have any witness? Would you like to come up and speak about your witness? And several people did. And I'm sitting there. God's kicking me in the butt.
I just gave you one, Sherry.
And I'm dressed in skins, you understand?
Okay.
Braids, buckskin, okay? And I'm sure they're like, who is this person? I was becoming myself, and I didn't know it, okay?
And you still hadn't known your wow, and you were still wearing skins.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you were accepting. That's...
Because I was following the spirit promptings. Okay. And the Medewiwin religion, although I didn't even know it was called Medewiwin at the time, made sense to me. Because it validated what was happening to me, and the visions and the dreams and the things that prompted me to follow a certain path.
It's kind of like your ancestors learned.
Yes.
That.
Yeah. One of them actually looked like an ancestor. One of the spirit guides, angels, whatever you want to call them. So I did. I finally got up, and I said, I just came back from a type of vision quest up in the Rockies, looking for my purpose in life. And I said, what came to me was Creator in the middle of the night telling me 1 is the highest number. So I've been pondering that. And I said, I looked out there, and there was people from different races out there. And I pointed to this black fellow. I said, you and I are the same. We're no different. Our spirits are from Creator. We're no different. And you could see people's eyes sort of going,
This is not what I've heard.
And I said, even we're the same as the trees and the earth. We're made of the same things.
Yeah.
And I really hadn't put much thought into it, so I just spit out a few things like that, and then I went and sat down. And
that's amazing that you went up there and did that in front of strangers based on the your vision quest, and I think it's very telling of you being able to follow those promptings that come, which is not easy for most people and just in general. So that's good.
Here's where it comes into healing. Okay. We have to develop our awareness of the spiritual world. Okay. We're told not to be conformed to this world, to the material world, but we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all through our scriptures,
Yeah.
everywhere.
Develop awareness of our spiritual world. It's all around us in every moment and everything we do and in everything that happens. But we have blinders on because we're so locked into these days technology, right?
Yeah.
Technology actually takes us away from our core self. Because you see people walking down the street doing,
Yeah,
you know,
you can't think
no,
to yourself like
you
you.
can't hear yourself. You can't
Yeah,
hear spirit. You
there it
have to
is.
have peace and quiet to hear spirit.
Yeah.
And so I tend to withdraw and hide a lot so that I could, like today, I went down to the beach, sat up on the pier, and wrote down some things that I felt prompted to talk about. And then came in and did ceremony to make sure that my thoughts were clear, okay, and that I gave my mouth and my voice over to Creator so that what comes out is His truth, not my truth, His truth.
And
I'm
let
just, go
no,
ahead.
go ahead, please. Oh, I was going to say, and let me say that just listen, everybody, to how she said that when it comes to let me speak the truth and let me speak what you think, and think about the blessing that she's asking for her own mouth, and think about how the things that we believe, we go to the temple, we go do all these things, at least as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's part of what we do, and these are blessings, things that we ask for. So she's right in so many ways. One is the highest number. I see what you're saying,
It takes
or
some
what God is
thought.
saying.
It takes some thought.
Yeah.
It really does. But it had me in circles for a long time. Okay. The thing that I want to get back to, the thing that became most healing for
Okay.
me was the night that my adoptive father passed away. Because as you know, with victims of abuse, one of the most difficult things to accomplish and one of the most difficult things to struggle with is holding your abuser accountable, to get satisfaction from that. And
Yeah.
most of the time it doesn't happen.
No.
Okay. So that night he died, again, I was just in prayer, like very mixed feelings. On one hand, don't have to deal with that anymore. And on the other hand, the person that was my father and, gave me a decent life overall
Yeah.
just passed. So I didn't know.
How old were you when that happened?
I was in my late 30s.
Okay.
Okay. And that night I saw clear as I'm looking at you in the middle of the night, a vision of my dad in heaven. I call him my dad. And he was sobbing. He was on his knees sobbing. And Christ was holding him. And there was another figure there, which I assumed was Creator or God, whatever you want to call him. And they were loving him. And he was sobbing, confessing to everything that he had done. Okay. And I realized at that moment, and I'm choking up a little, that I didn't have to hold him accountable. That was being done for me. So it took that burden away from me, that I didn't have to hold them accountable. And I want people to hear this that have been abused. It's not your job to hold them accountable, because it's only going to frustrate you most of the time. Most people
Yeah.
have a lot of
Even
difficulty.
if you get it,
It's not
it's
quite enough.
yeah.
But know that in heaven, or whatever you want to call it, they will be held accountable in the most loving, caring way possible so that they can purge themselves of their darkness.
Yeah.
And that helped me more than anything, because suddenly I felt really free of the whole thing.
Wow. When you
And
saw that vision, did you feel the connection because that they had with your father?
yeah, actually, at that point, I still, when I think of it, I can feel love for him. Not
Which
disdain, not fear, not get away from me.
so it was like filtered through Christ, the really the mind of Christ.
Yes.
So yeah, that's
Yeah,
so powerful.
yeah,
I
it was very powerful. It's still very powerful.
so
Very
powerful.
powerful. Um, so it was after all that that I really tried to put it all together and started again searching for my birth
Hmm.
mother and father. Found my birth mother in 2004, 10 years ago.
Okay.
I was really blessed because she wanted to see me. That doesn't often happen. I was prepared to be totally rejected when I started this search, because I've
That'd
done
be
it a lot for people in my practice as well, help them search. And some of it didn't turn out so good. And you have to be prepared for that. So I was prepared for the worst. But she was, bless her heart, she was on death's door. She died 9 months after I met her. I said, "That's okay, Mom. You gave me birth after 9 months, so I'm seeing you through your last 9 months." you know,
it's
it's
poetic.
fair. Fair's fair, right? And you
I
didn't
guess.
abort me. And she told me
Yeah.
she had the option, and she didn't. So I was forever grateful for that.
Yeah.
You know, so that really tweaked my thinking about abortion. If you can imagine,
Yeah. I
to
could.
be
Yeah.
told to be told that that was an option, and and I
That.
was glad then too that I didn't take that option when I was pregnant. My son, and giving me two lovely grandsons, and they're the light of my life.
And if you contrast that with some of the pain that comes when you do someone does abort that I've seen in friends and others, that
Mhm.
it's just it's always a painful thing.
Yes.
So this is it's you know
Yeah. We
yeah.
can't play God. We can't play God with abortion. We can't play God with transgender. We're trying to play God, and it never works out.
Yeah, we even try to play God with healing.
Yes.
When they try and do it in the way that they clinically think is correct all the time, without including the spiritual side of it, they are cutting out God very specifically.
Yes.
And He is the very key component, just as you just testified, and I
Yep.
can as well, at least for the portion of healing that I've received, that He is the very key of breaking up that darkness and
Yep.
filling the hole, because you've got to fill it. Purge it as much as you want, but if you don't put something in there that's light, it's
Yep.
going to stay dark. It's going to come back.
Well, that's the whole point of what I'm trying to say too.
Yeah.
In recovery and mental health, spirituality, if it's left out, leaves an incomplete piece of work.
Yeah.
If you don't include spirituality, then you're missing out, because body, soul, and spirit, you've got to address all aspects of what makes us human.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's what I've tried to do in my practice and in my own life. Okay. And you're talking about things about doctors. I had breast cancer and had a double mastectomy
Mm.
and was offered chemotherapy, immunotherapy, you name it, therapy, radiation treatment, all of that. And every time I went to the oncologist, I would get this feeling in my gut that would just suck me back. Just like that. Just like, don't come near me. Don't
Yeah.
touch me. Don't. And every once in a while I'd listen to him and I'd say, well, okay. And then 20 minutes later I'd go back, no, forget I said that.
So
So
was this prompting?
yes,
Okay.
because I did not take chemo, I did not take immunology therapy, I did not take radiation therapy, and I've been cancer free for 8 years.
Oh, it's beautiful. That's good.
And I consider that if I had done that, I wouldn't be telling this story. If I had done what they wanted me to.
I'm
So
glad you listened.
learning to discern and listen to your core self is so critical in healing. You know, and you got to put that core self back together and recognizing that it's spirit. It's not just a thought. It's not just a feeling. It's an actual spiritual presence within you that you have to develop discernment about. And that's why I read things like The Mind of Christ, or I read things like First Corinthians, or I read things like Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that which is good and acceptable. Okay? And that's cognitive behavioral therapy, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I encompass. And I don't impose that unless somebody, I said, this is a spiritual issue. Do you want to address spiritual issues? And of course, you have to do so much therapy until they're ready to
Yeah.
receive the spiritual aspects of it. But I always weave it in there somehow. Okay? And
Which
I have clients that are Buddhists, and it doesn't matter because one's the highest number.
we
Every
all
religion says the same thing, only
we all
different.
came from the same place,
Same
from the
place.
same creator.
Yeah.
And there might be some differences, but we focus on that rather than things that are the same, which
Yes.
basically are the seven grandfather teachings and
Yes.
the seven Mosaic, or not Mosaic, but
Noahide
Noahide laws.
laws. Yeah.
And, these are universal things that he has taught through
Mhm.
every religion. And so why don't we let why don't we let that unite us rather than all the other mess divide us? And I realize that that's not on topic exactly, but I had to say it because there's just a feeling that I get that it's so necessary for this world that we come together and understand that there is so much similar between all of us, and God is real, and we unite under him. We unite with him,
Yes.
and that's the goal. That's what we really
The
what we should
thing
be
that
doing.
we have to overcome is the same thing that Mitiga and I have been working to overcome within our tribes, and that is that separation that
Yeah.
comes from the trauma, that developmental um, detachment or attachment, dysregulation, and people don't even realize they have it.
No.
Okay, and so I try to teach people about that and why they have problems in relationships. And I was my own student for a long time, you understand, and that never ends. That never ends. I really have to practice what I preach constantly.
And
Okay.
remind yourself in the front part of your brain
Yes.
that, hey, this is happening
Yeah.
emotionally,
Yeah.
and so you recognize it, and then you have tools that
Yes.
allow you to step
Yeah.
forward
And the
and
tools are
yeah,
what we learn in therapy, and
yeah.
I have a lot of those on my website too, and I'll give some more um, here in a minute.
Okay.
Um, I gotta get my. Oh, you're talking about the brain. Well,
Yes.
there's interest now, finally, in how spiritual experiences affect our cognition and
Oh,
affect our brain.
they they denied for so long that it's even possible.
Well, it's not. It's becoming more mainstream. I wouldn't say that it's exactly in the flow yet,
Yeah.
but Bessel van der Kolk, which is a preeminent psychiatrist. You can Google him. Has an institute that does research on how our nervous system and brain and the vagus nerve interact, and I use a lot of his tools in my therapy for regulating your dysregulated nervous system through exercises with your vagus nerve. Um, uh,
Could
that's
I
cool.
ask? Go
Yeah.
ahead. If you have more thoughts, I want you to be able to get everything out. But I had a question for you.
Okay. Well, the other person is a lady by the name of Professor Lisa Miller. And she does research on what happens to the brain during a spiritual experience. And it's just in its kind of infancy,
Okay.
but it was interesting to me because part of their control group was Mormons
Oh.
and other religions, but they use a lot of Mormons to as part of their study group.
Okay.
So I find that interesting in her work and just interesting. And what they find is when you're involved in a spiritual experience or even remembering one, the part of your brain that's depressed stops being depressed and feels more connected.
Hmm.
It heals that disconnect, okay, even temporarily. So I'm really interested to follow their research about how to apply that in therapy in terms of, reliving the experience. And I'm not so sure that that's a good thing, but how to do that so that you can replace the depression with the sense of empathy and connection. And as we know, PTSI is a combination of depression and anxiety. At any one time, it can rear its ugly head in either and sometimes
Yeah.
both directions at once.
Which is an odd feeling, but it happens.
Yes, as those of us well know.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why I like the title of in the spirit of healing, because it combines what we're starting to find out from the science as well as and listening to spiritual experiences, okay, as being part of the healing process. There's an author by the name of Anita Morjani. Have you heard of her?
No, I haven't.
Well, she fascinated me. She had a book called Dying to Be Me. And it was, I wish Renelle was here, because it was the near-death experience for her from cancer,
Oh,
where
wow.
she got to see the afterlife and see the choices that created the cancer in her.
That
And
would very much hit home with Renelle.
yes, and she's had several books since that. One is what if this is heaven?
Okay.
Okay. And she comes from an Eastern tradition, but what she writes is, again, one is the highest number.
She wrote that?
No, she
Oh,
wrote
same. Okay.
the same theme. It doesn't matter what tradition she comes from.
Yeah.
The spirit is all the same.
Okay. Yeah, you're
And
right.
she talks about that and the conclusions that she came to. And it was very handy for me when I was going through the cancer, because I had some of those same experiences. And so she validated me in terms of my not wanting to do what the doctors were telling me.
Another lead thou vision, my vision type situation.
Yes.
With the spirit telling you and leading you, guiding you to read that book.
Yes. Yep. And everyone that she's written since.
That's good.
So I weave this stuff into my practice when it's appropriate and when clients agree. I don't foist it on them, of course.
Yeah.
But most people see the value in it. I have one guy, he's a first responder, and his thinking is about as worldly as it comes. And I even found a book for him that was called Spirituality for Hardheads or Hard something like that.
How to break through the very, very stubborn head.
Yeah. So yeah, that kind of sums it up, is that we've got to incorporate everything we know. We have to stop this division.
Yeah,
You know,
seriously.
the thing that happened with Mitika was really upsetting to me, because I met him almost 4 years ago now through genie.com, doing my genealogy. Okay. And this guy kept showing up as a cousin a few times removed. And
He said hi, by the way, in the chat.
oh, is he in the chat?
He was or is.
Oh, okay.
He said, "I love you."
God, I love that man. We're mother and son together. You know, we are. Anyway, we met him through genie.com, and he kept showing up. And I finally said, you know, what is this Ogichi-da guy? Prompting.
Yeah.
I think I need to email him and find out a little more about him. And he's the one that really opened my eyes to research my history further, because I did find out who my birth father was, and I found a half brother as well. And
Was he your half brother alive?
yes,
Okay.
one is and one isn't. I actually have 5 half brothers.
Oh wow.
One is alive, lives in Florida. And that was just recently, actually,
Wow.
within the year.
Oh wow.
I found him. But the Bouvier family was totally intermingled with the Ojibwe people. They were buffalo hunters. They worked for the Northwest Company. They worked for Hudson's Bay Company. They were
Okay.
voyageurs. So they intermarried what they called country wives. So
Okay.
suddenly, once I started putting all this together, my genealogy with Mitika is interwoven.
Hmm.
Our families crisscross, not once or twice, but a dozen times.
Oh
And,
wow.
and the Bouviers were known as Métis, Ojibwe, and French Canadian.
Okay.
So that's my history. When I met my birth mom, when I was doing the research, that was convoluted. You know, if you're doing genealogy, be prepared. There's always skeleton that's going to fall out of the closet.
Yeah, I can imagine.
She died before the skeletons fell out of the closet, which I think is a good thing, because I found out that her father was not her father. He was not my grandfather.
Wow.
And the person that she thought was her father was not my father, my grandfather. Because I kept getting all these French and Ojibwe matches,
Yeah.
and I didn't know where to connect them for a long time. I got a search angel that helped me discern what was my female side and what was my male side. And as I researched the female side, I go back to the Mayflower 3 or 4 times.
Oh,
So
wow.
literally, one side of my family met the other side of my family in the confluence of the Northeast, Canada and USA.
Which is fraught with history.
And separation and
Yeah.
wars and the French and Indian War, the American Revolution,
Yep.
and all that border history. And,
Yeah. Especially for the Ojibwe and your
Yes.
people with Canada.
yeah.
So that's
And even, you know, in Maine, the Indian population here is very high.
oh
Very
really?
high.
I did not know that.
But yeah, a lot of people don't even know it. I can look at them and say, you know, who was your grandmother? Who was you know? Well, she said she was Micmac. I go, I think so. Maybe. You could look into that if you wanted. There's a lot of that, because of the intermingling between the colonists, the French, and the Indians in this area. You
Okay.
know,
Yeah, that's. And when you said my search angel, what do you mean by that?
um, I was a member of a website that specialized in genealogy and people helping to connect the dots,
Okay.
because it can be very confusing.
Yeah,
And
I
and so it doesn't all go by DNA, but DNA helped me to recognize that I had French and Indian in me and didn't have a clue.
it's what told you to keep looking.
Yeah, and what
Yeah.
validated my life experience,
Oh, for sure. Like
you
just
know.
I
And
mean,
then
you lived
coming
so
across,
long
yeah,
living your ancestors like what's
I
the
was in
word?
my
Legacy.
50s. Yeah,
Wow,
50s and early 60s when all this happened. Okay,
man.
but I had immersed myself in the culture anyways. Um, because it was the prompting, right?
Yep.
Mitigo, when he first met me, he's like, "How do you know all that?" I don't know. It just happened. And the more we talked, and the more we talked, and the rest they say is history. And we've been together since.
And you would think 4 years seems like a short amount of time, but I would put out there that you've been known each other for a lot longer than that.
Yeah. When your spirits meet, you know you've been there before.
Yep.
You know, you want to call it soulmate, and no, it's more of a spiritual connection.
Yeah.
You know, and
And if you haven't out there actually felt that kind of connection with somebody else, maybe open yourself a little bit up for it, because I believe that we all come across those type of people that just
Mhm.
are connected to us whether we know it or not, and there's a draw to them. And I think that that's a wonderful thing to recognize and be able to use to navigate your life a little
yeah.
bit.
I felt a very similar connection when I met not only my birth mother, but my four cousins from that side of the family, which I'm still very close friends with today.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
so I have connections from both sides of my being now, hundreds of them, when there was a time in my life when I didn't know any of them. Because I remember when my son that I gave birth to was in the military during Desert Storm. He was in the Navy, and he was
Okay.
overseas in Saudi, Kuwait, somewhere. I was terrified.
Mm.
I was terrified because he was the only person in the world that I knew I was related to at that time.
Wow.
And if anything happened to him, I would feel that disconnection again. Because with him, I felt like I had a connection. I knew somebody.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was an anchor almost.
Yes, in a way.
Yeah.
Uh, so, yeah,
That is
fortunately, he's still with us. So,
that is good.
yeah.
I'm very glad for that.
And then Midiga comes in, and so I'm very fortunate. I've got two sons that have served their country,
Yep.
and very proudly, and uh, and both are fine young men. And so part of what hurt me so bad with this, what happened with Midigo, was that there was all this blaming and shaming and no discernment.
Yeah.
And discernment doesn't require attacking. Discernment requires critical thinking and the mind of Christ. And I wasn't seeing that. I wasn't seeing people acting very Christ-like. They were acting very materialistically, egotistically, you know, and
Completely out of line. I mean, there's lots of words I would use that I don't want to use here
yeah,
because it made me very, very frustrated to watch.
yeah. So, yeah, me too. It was
Yeah.
devastating, and you know that's trauma, and people don't realize. but the way that they behaved towards him re-traumatized him, triggered his trauma.
Yeah.
If you read his life story.
Yeah.
So
I've
now he
listened to
has
him
to
say it.
go about uh, healing some of that again, and finding his purpose now, whether
Yeah.
it's different or the same or whatever. But he has to regroup,
Yeah.
and it hurt him a lot, and it was very damaging, and to a lot of people actually. So
And
pray thee, be thou my vision, and that's what changes people, is having the mind of Christ. You know, you call
yeah.
it Daganawida, you what the peacemaker,
Yeah.
whatever. It's the same. It's one.
It's
Okay.
the one that unites us with our creator.
Yes,
The
and
focal
unites us with
point.
each other.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
You know,
And
and you
then
can, like, I feel that with you. And it's beautiful because uh, it's a connection that just comes from the spirit, that just comes from however you want to explain it, that's there. And
yeah.
I am very grateful that, one, you're open enough to be able to, you know, allow that. So I've been
Well,
very grateful.
I use myself, the use of self in therapy. It has a storied history, but I use my own experience to validate other people's experience. I just don't sit there and go, how'd you feel about that? You know, who cares? You know, how did that impact your core self?
Yeah.
And where's your sense of who you are? And, you know, John Bradshaw, who was an eminent healer in his own right, was on television a lot, wrote a lot of books. He called it the hole in your soul.
Yeah.
You know, the hole in your soul. And when you meet somebody, everybody has that hole. So are you going to poke it and trigger their trauma, or are you going to say something kind to them?
Yeah. It's amazing what kind will
Always
do.
find something kind to say.
You really can.
You
And
know?
I, I completely agree. And I think our culture just is just at each other's throats, and it's so sad to see. And it's just re-traumatizing so many people all at once, and
Yes.
it's just this
Yes.
snowball effect that
Mhm.
kindness has the same power, if not more, going
Yes.
in the opposite direction.
Absolutely.
And so if we just have to be able to turn that, flip the scales. And right now it may seem impossible, but I believe firmly that it's not impossible and that it will happen. It's just, how much pain do we have to go through, you know, when we could just be kind and connect through the things that are the same.
Yeah, that requires that we develop our awareness of the spiritual world within us and around us,
Yeah.
whether it be the mind of Christ, the seven grandfather teaching, the fruits of the Spirit, the seven Noahide laws, all of those things.
Yeah.
Um, if we were to major in that instead of our differences, but it's hard to do because you have to be willing to heal yourself, to look at your shadow, to look at your we call them faults, but I call them symptoms.
Okay. I think that's a very, I like that. I mean, as
Okay.
far as it making sense.
Yeah. What is your symptom? Where were you injured? Where is your
Uh,
psychological injury? Where has your core self or your core belief been torn?
I
And
kind of
let's
want to
heal.
answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have 10 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had a experience maybe Friday, and was a great experience overall, but there was one moment where, and I have this symptom where I can't, once I get triggered into a moment and have an episode, I can't speak. I can't think through things, and so I completely stop being able to speak. And the one reason why I can do something like this is because I do it through a spiritual lens. And so it allows me to be able to not have to protect myself in a certain way that my body automatically does. And so
That's
I was
the beauty of calling on your inner spirit. It can do things that you can't do.
Yeah. And so, sorry, I'm tangled up in my cord. So there we go. I fixed it. So I was at this lunch and I was just talking, and there was an interruption that happened. And in my mind, instantly went to, oh, they don't think I'm important. They don't think that this is interesting. So I can't put a word on it right now, but that they're not hearing me. They're not listening to me. Or
You felt invalidated.
yeah. And so it was just momentarily, but it completely stopped me right in the middle of a sentence. And I just blah. And that's something that I've worked on for as long as I can. It's the one thing that I can't seem to get past.
That sounds like part of the freeze response.
Sounds
Trauma,
right.
fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Mm-hmm.
That for you, that's part of the freeze response, that your nervous system stops. So for you, I would recommend some of the vagus nerve exercises that you could do to intervene in that. And that's something we can talk about,
Okay.
because it's a bit involved, but it's simple. And maybe, another podcast we can talk about these little self-healing tips
Yeah, just the
that
techniques
work.
in general
Yeah,
that because
that
I
work
think
on the
different things,
physiology of it, and not just the psychological.
you can't outthink it.
No,
It's
in fact, you can overthink it. Really.
oh yeah, you can push yourself through stuff like that for a certain period of time maybe, but it
Then
just
it
damages
crashes.
you.
Yep.
Yep.
Then it crashes. That's where I like Bessel van der Kolk, because he really goes into rewiring the nervous system and the brain and the science of it.
Okay.
Not so much the spirituality, but the science of it.
And see, my spirituality is where I find the release and where I find safety, and so all these things are. I mean, there's just something in my brain that's just wired wrong, or
No, it's not wired wrong. It's
So
been
what-
injured.
yeah, there you go. Okay, so I
But
got to
it
change my
can-
language here.
It can be mitigated. That's what I'm
Okay.
saying.
Can I do things beforehand? Like if I know I'm going to be in a situation where that is probably going to happen?
Yeah, you can preach to yourself a little bit, what we call self-talk.
Ooh.
Um,
I'm going to look like a madman out there.
well, you see,
I'm
that's
in.
the problem. The things that really help us psychologically are deemed as
Taboo.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
talking to yourself is a really good way. Talking out loud to yourself is a really good way to rewire your brain. Here, let's try a little experiment. You
Ooh.
wanna?
I like experiments.
Okay.
I'm excited.
I'm going to ask you in a minute to count slowly from 1 to 10. Okay, in your head.
Okay.
Then I'm going to give you a command to do.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Start counting in your head slowly from 1 to 10. Now say your name out loud.
Miles. I can't do both.
Exactly.
I had to stop counting.
Yeah. So if you're into a cycle in your head that is basically obsessive or compulsive somehow, like counting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you start to talk to yourself out loud, you stop that cycle.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
What a
it.
trick.
Yeah. That's the psychoneuroimmunology.
And so is it specifically need to be to myself, or can I talk to someone else?
Whichever works for you, but you need to be saying something out loud. It's talking.
It's
Your brain has to stop and listen to what you're saying.
okay. So putting it into a sentence and just start
Yes.
talking, because until I couldn't talk until I stopped counting, but having to think through it, it didn't stop counting until I said it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I had to actually say it out loud for
Yes.
it to be
Yes.
interrupted.
So
Okay.
I advise everybody to talk to themselves and tell everybody else to go pound sand. If they say, "What are you, nuts?"
I like it.
Yeah.
I like that. Go pound sand, guys. You know, that's just what we got to do, because I want to talk to myself now.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's all kinds of little interventions that you can self do that I teach people.
It's very, very simple too. That's okay, I'm
Anybody
gonna try
can
that next
do
time.
it. Yeah.
So everybody, let me say this, Sherry, thank you. You have been a wonderful guest multiple times on the show, and I am very grateful for your time and energy that you've put in. And I just am happy that we've been able to connect and have these kind of conversations. For me personally, as well as for anyone else that it may help.
Well, you're entirely welcome, and the honor is mine. Because any way I can get the word out there,
Yeah,
and help people on their pathway to healing, I'm all for it.
that's
as long
honestly,
as I have a breath left.
that's honestly why I wanted to do the show to begin with. Is if I can help other people, I can help myself as well. If I can, and I felt the spirit to do it, and it just led me. And Andra had a few statements throughout the show, which were very great. We won't need to go back through them all. We can just read them. But thank you for being a part of the show, Andra. And she said, "Thanks for sharing your wisdom. The world needs this."
Thank you very much.
So it's not just me.
Oh. Miigwech.
No.
That means thank you very much in Ojibwe.
Miigwech.
Miigwech. Miigwetch. Miigwech.
Awesome.
Chi. Yep.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anytime. I'd be happy, because we got to get this out, and
We really do.
When you upload this podcast to YouTube, I'll be sure to share it far and wide. And
if everyone could do that, it'd be great.
Yeah.
Because as much as we can get the word out there, and it's not just about the show, it's about connecting the world and becoming, having a goal to become one. And that's
connecting
ultimately
with yourself, as the Bible puts it, love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
So you're the middleman.
Yep. That's
loving God and connecting with the spirit within yourself. Let it flows to other people.
Yeah.
And part of what happens to trauma victims is they forget the middle part. They become people pleasers and over responsible, and they leave themselves out of the equation.
Yeah.
And that's a trauma response.
So
getting them to reconnect with the spirituality the way we were told, it just gave me goosebumps. God knows that. Goosebumps is a good indicator that your spirit's alive and working.
There it is. It's like, ooh, it's like the cold rush of going outside cold.
I guess I had to put that on as an addendum.
Addendum, done. So thank you. And
you, Ren.
everyone, you have a wonderful night. We are glad that you came to watch Alive again, and we will see you on the other side.
Yeah, we will. Thank you.
And